This time I'll call the Budget and Purchasing Committee meeting to order. And Ashley, I'll ask if you will do the roll call, please.
Kirby, Lewis, Mitchell,
Here.
Moon, Samples. You have a quorum.
And I'll ask if you will do a emergency announcement, please.
Before we get started, let me read the emergency evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency evacuation, an alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by way of the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you have reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Please be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles.
I'll now ask if there's any public input on items on the agenda. Seeing none. Item D, purchasing. So all of these are for information only. We'll move on to item E, the minutes that need approving. They're in your packet. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes? Have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion? I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Next we have the finance portion. F1, increases and transfers. F1A, County Clerk Fund 101. I'm going to go ahead and get a motion and a second, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I think Roy would like to come up and do a presentation. Have a motion. Do I have a second? Have a motion and a second. I'll open the floor to Roy.
Mr. Chairman, I've got one question. Is this one printer or two printers? How many printers?
Actually, there are 14.
That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Last year, you all were, allowed us to start an automation project. We bought some scanners, and we're now scanning the motor vehicle items as the work is done. That's sent to Nashville. We now have on demand information from the state. We no longer have to batch and mail everything at the end of each day to Nashville. It's saving us staff time, and it's increased efficiency. It's been a very successful program, and we appreciate that. We'd like to take one more step this year. The State Department of Revenue has instituted a new program called Decals on Demand. And basically, I think all of you are familiar with your vehicle registration renewals. You get a renewal notice from the state. You bring that notice into one of our offices. Our clerks scan the barcode, comes up on a screen. The clerk enters a number off of a pre-printed decal. You process the payment. The renewal of the registration is printed. The decal is stapled to the registration and given to the customer. 5 years ago, that was state-of-the-art, very efficient system. Nowadays, that's pretty labor-intensive. The state has started a new program that would allow us to actually print the registration and the decal at the time of purchase. This will be the new registration form, and you can see the decal right here. We will no longer have to keep up with the inventory on the decals. And that's a very time-consuming process to keep up with that. That takes one clerk's, probably 25% of one clerk's time just to keep up with the inventory on decals. This will speed up the process greatly. And it also has some benefits as far as security. Would you pass this around? If you'll notice, the number on the decal is the same thing as the license number, so that if for some reason that decal gets stolen, If the license plate number does not match the number on the decal, law enforcement will know there's a problem. So there is increased security. There's increased benefit as far as the speeding up the amount of time. We can wait on more customers with the same number of people. So it's I think, a real benefit to the county. The state will provide the card stock for those. The state will also provide $7,000 toward the purchase of the printers. The Information Technology Department and the Purchasing Department have taken quotes on 14 printers, and the total with the printers, the ribbons, the configuration, and the installation is $9,090. So I'm asking for a transfer from the county clerk's computer fund, which is a designated account that can only be spent for projects such as this. I'm asking for a transfer of $10,000. We use the additional money to purchase ribbons for that. So are there any questions?
The $7,000 they go back and forth that account?
Yes, the state will reimburse us. We have to put the money up front, but the state will reimburse us.
So you'll end up spending $3,000.
Yes, sir.
Roy, have you started this yet, or is you still in the?
No, we're, of course, we have to purchase the printers first.
Okay.
We have to get them installed, and so it's a matter of getting the computer company to get in here to do that.
Well, I promise you, the people at the window would have loved to have had those today, because you have been absolutely inundated all day today. So they were backed all the way around to Scott's office, so I know that this is going to be a big help to you.
Well, thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please. Thank you, Roy.
If I could
Thank you.
just add, in case somebody wanted to ask this question, the equipment or technology fund that he's referring to, at the close of business last year, he had $34,155 in it, and you've appropriated to date $4,788. So he has enough money to meet this request.
Kirby?
Yeah, go ahead.
Lewis? Yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? Yes. The motion's passed.
Thank you. Item F1B, school funds, 47,531 on the Tennessee Energy Efficient Schools Initiative Grant. We want to go ahead and get that out there and then ask Troy to come up and explain that if that's what you all wish. Do I have a motion? Have a motion. Do I have a second? Now, does anyone have any questions? Would they like for Troy to come up? Come on up, Troy.
Mr. Chairman, this is a flow-through 100% non-matching grant, correct?
Yes, sir.
Troy? And the use for it is obviously efficiency.
It has to be used for energy efficient upgrades, yes.
Is there any other discussion, any other questions?
Is this earmarked for anything in particular, Troy?
I believe I provided a copy of the proposal. It may not be in your packet, but it's for, I'm not going to be able to, I don't pretend to understand what this is, but at Heritage High School, William Blount High School, Heritage Middle, Union Grove, for installation of standalone power meters with associated power supply and current transducers to be located in building switch gears. It's a monitoring tool for our maintenance folks to monitor utility usage at these schools.
Anyone like for him to go any more in depth on that? Hearing no other discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Kirby? Lewis? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Item F1C, Schools Capital Project Fund, $189,177,045 for high school track replacements. Have a move that we send it forward. Do I have a second? Have a move in a second. Is there any questions? Would you like for Troy to come back up? Troy, would you like to come back up, please?
Are we dealing with this again?
You, as the Budget Committee and the Commission last year approved this project, and we had it appropriated. We did not get it started, obviously, or completed, obviously, by the end of June, as I had thought we would. So this is just, I have to come back to reappropriate. I thought we'd get it done before the end of the year, so I didn't put it in the original appropriations budget for next year. Pardon me? You didn't put it in the budget? No.
Is this the same amount? It
It's
looks to be close.
It's $5,045 more than the original quote. We had an estimate that was from a company that was good for 45 days. In the meantime, we put it out for bid. The price of materials, we're told, went up in that time period, and they came back with the low bid was $177,000, or the awarded bid was $177,000.
So the cost was 177,045 with the 5 added.
Yes, sir.
Any more discussion? Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Kirby? Lewis? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Thank you, Troy. Having no transfers, we'll now move on to discussion items. Item G, discussion and possible action. The first item on the discussion agenda is Amelia's Law, and I'd ask that Judge Brewer come up and lead us in a quick study of that.
I've enclosed in your packet a copy of Public Chapter 567, which is commonly called the Amelia's Law. We felt like it was incumbent to advise this body, this commission, and the public of the potential financial impact of Blount County because this law has been enacted. First of all, as a group, we have certainly nothing but sympathy for that family that went through what they've had to go through. You know, having children, I can't imagine what they've had to go through. But having said that, we heard about it and read about it and thought, and I initially thought, well, this is going to apply solely to parolees, which means that somebody's been convicted of a felony, they've gone to the penitentiary, and they've been released. General Flynn, a few weeks ago, brought to my attention that it does apply to more than just folks that are being released on parole. There are 4 sections to the statute, and I want to focus on the one that will affect Blount County the most, and that's Section 3. And Section 3 amends the probation statute 40-35-303D and adds a new subsection. And you'll note that it's subsection 12, which means that there are 11 other subsections that are already in that statute, and I'll talk about those in a moment. But it adds 12, and it's simply put, A, to use a transdermal monitoring device or other alternative monitoring device if the court determines that the defendant's use of alcohol or drugs was a contributing factor in the defendant's unlawful conduct, and the defendant's granted probation on or after July 1 of this year. So what does that mean? If you look at 40-35-303, like I said, there's 11 other factors that the court can look at, such as requiring restitution, meeting with a probation officer, perform community service, several different things that we routinely do, but we routinely require probationers. And Joni and her staff are able to do that efficiently. someone placed on probation now is required to pay a fee of $45 per month, and that basically it pays for her staff and to do what they do for these 11 other conditions. And none of these are mandatory. The language in the statute says that that we may require the offenders to comply with certain conditions, and they may include, but are not limited to. It's not shall. Shall is mandatory. May is discretionary on the court. So keep that in mind. The statute, if you looked at it, it doesn't provide any funding at all. I guess the theory is that either the offender or the county is going to pick up the tab for these devices. Currently, we don't have the provider that we use now for our electronic monitoring cannot provide this service to us. Joni has been looking at some other providers, and I'm going to let her. Joni, come on up here and tell me, because she's done a lot of work on this. And I'm going to hand you out a handout too that I wasn't able to get included in your packet. That will describe. First page tells of various providers, and they do it a different way. Second page is some numbers. I'll talk to you about here in just a few minutes. Numbers as well. Scary part. Joni, go ahead. I guess you go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Chairman, and the committee for allowing me to speak tonight. The options that we have explored, and Teresa Johnson from purchasing has helped me in this as well. There's 2 different transdermal alcohol devices that are available. One is called Scram X, and the other is called TAD, which is the transdermal alcohol device. They both essentially do a lot of the same things. They monitor alcohol content from sweat. It's a 24/7 monitoring. One of them measures the alcohol every 10 minutes, one test every 30 minutes. They essentially download to either a cellular data or a landline. It depends on what the offender would have. We did some research on how much these devices would cost. We checked with BI, who typically is the distributor for the TAD units. And if we went with BI and we did just, and all of this is approximate, we don't have any actual figures, but if we did go through BI and we actually purchased the units, each unit would cost roughly $2,569.55 per unit, and that would be cost to the county to actually have those units. And then the daily monitoring fee would be anywhere. It would depend if it was a landline or a cellular data, and it would be anywhere from $654 to $852 a day. But that would be with us buying the units, which is a great cost to the county. They do have 2 companies that would service this area with the TAD unit, where they would collect the fees and they would do the monitoring and notify my staff of any alcohol event. We would get a daily report on that, and the cost to that would be about $8 to $10 a day. And like I said, there's so many different factors on what the price would actually be, but it would probably be no higher than $10, but it is to be paid by the offender. But the 2 companies would be Kentucky Alternative Programs or Tennessee Electronic Monitoring, and they work with BI, and they would do the monitoring, the managing the inventory, and collect the fees, but my staff would be the ones that would be responsible for hooking the people up with the bracelet and referring them to those companies. Our other option is Scram X. It is around $8 to $10 per day per offender, and it is sole source provider through Tennessee Recovery and Monitoring System. They would handle everything such as the monitoring, the managing inventory, and they would collect the fees for us so we wouldn't assume the financial responsibility burden on the county. And they would do, they would give us reports back each day as well. If we went directly through Scram X, the company, we would have to actually purchase the devices just like we would if we went with the TAD unit and bought those from BI. The cost of that would be $1,405 per unit, and then you would have to buy a modem for $400, or you would rent it for $20 per monthly rental fee, which that would be a cost to the county, and then the daily monitoring rate for the offender would be $4.40. But we would be responsible if we did it that way. If we bought our own product, we would be responsible for managing our inventory, doing all the monitoring. We would get the reports from them, but we would have to do a lot of the work related to that, which I would have to increase staff probably by double if we did that. So right now, that's essentially our options that we've explored at this point. Obviously, it's not set in stone, those numbers, but that is what myself and Teresa have found out at this point.
Anybody have any questions?
Yes, sir.
In order to enforce this law, are you saying we have to buy these devices?
No. Joni's found, the options that she's presented basically are that there's a couple of companies where you have to buy the device, and there's a couple of them that don't, that you don't have to buy, that they do all the monitoring. My suggestion would be that they do as little as they have to, because they don't have the manpower to do it with the current level of personnel they have now. That's just part of it. Okay, that's just part of the problem. Here's where we're, and stop me at any time. Here's where we're going, I think. As I said, it's going to, more than half of the people that are on probation now have been declared to be indigent by the court. They've been appointed an attorney, whether it be the public defender's office or another attorney with the public defender's office has a conflict. Those public defender's office personnel and those attorneys are paid by the state. Okay, but I don't know the exact number, but let's see, Joni, how many we got on right now? We got 1,847 probationers currently now, and that number's fluid. It comes and goes up and down, but it's pretty much been staying about the same.
Yes.
And over half of them have, as I said, have been declared to be indigent. It's everything we can do to try to get them to pay the $45 a month, as well as our fines and court costs, and we have an excellent system for that. Now, if you most of them are on probation for, I'd say average, some are 6 months, some are 11 months, 29 days. I'd say the average, we'll say the average is 9 months or so. $10 a day for 9 months. I don't know how they're going to do it.
So if they don't pay, Judge, does that mean they stay in jail if they don't pay?
If they don't comply with the rules of probation, and if that's one of the rules that we put on them, then the ultimate, they could go to jail. Now let's say, and let me go back on this. Look at the second page. These are, Joni put these numbers together. The ones in bold are the ones that are directly involved the use of alcohol or drugs. That number totals, I added it up here.
1285, Judge.
Yeah, something like that. 1,200, I believe. I had a note here somewhere on it, but let's say that that's directly involved. Now the statute says, again, going back to the statute, all this kind of diverges, but it's going to converge here in just a moment as to the statute, wherever I put it at. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that the, for instance, someone that's out here shoplifting or breaking into your house, they're probably supporting a drug habit. Domestic violence cases, more often than not, or somebody that's under the influence of something. So those are indirectly could be placed on the program probably, or on the monitoring. Let's assume that, again, if they can't pay, should they be violated? That'd be a decision the court would have to make. But let's assume they can pay. We frankly believe, and we've talked for days and hours, my colleagues and I, about this, and we think perhaps if you go by the spirit of the statute, we think perhaps 1,500 out of these 1,800 and some either the alcohol or drugs was a contributing factor to their unlawful conduct. Let's assume that half of them do good. Well, let's assume the other half doesn't. That's 750 people. You got room for 750 people? 750 more shares? And we think it's likely that it'll be more than that will offend. Frank, just based on historic what we know. There's you can just see the issues.
If a failure was your child, though, it'd be irrelevant to you whether they offended or not. Your child's still gone.
Right. And as I understand it, none of these options that we have, as far as the provider, will give you an immediate indication that they're using alcohol. It's about the quickest one. The next day, I want your report the next day. Then you won't know where they're at.
So it doesn't give you GPS like our monitoring system now does.
No.
And it doesn't report instantly. It could be as much as 24 hours later. I'm having trouble seeing how we're making a difference, because if they're drinking, that's when we want them. I mean, that's when you want them, not to keep them off the road.
Exactly.
Help me understand something, Judge.
Yes, sir.
All of these people on the second page, they've already been arrested.
Yeah, they've been convicted.
They're on probation.
They're all on probation.
So what you're telling me is that we ought to buy these things and put them on half these people?
No, you can't do it on these folks. Because
Can't do it on these people.
I'm just giving you a representative
Okay.
of what's likely we're going to see for the next year.
But if we don't buy them, they're just gonna be on probation like these people are.
Right. Again, it's whatever the court decides to order.
Yeah.
You guys want to jump in? Dave's got a different situation because he's a circuit court. Okay, he deals with state.
We're differently situated because we're state. There's nothing Joni can do to help us because our probation, our alternative sentence is either going to be on state probation through the state probation office, or it's going to be on community corrections through ETHRA. But in the end, it's the same problem. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with it too. And the reality is, we're all judges. I know I speak for everybody. We're the kind of judges who believe we understand and we know and we believe that it's up to the General Assembly or a local legislative body to make the law. It's our job to follow it. It's not our job to decide what the law ought to be. And we're going to do the best we can do to follow it. But right now, compliance with this law is impossible because none of the probation or community correction offices have these devices. We could order people today to wear a device and we can't put one on them. And you can't very well violate somebody and potentially send them to jail when it's impossible for them to comply with the court's order. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take us to get in the position where we can potentially comply, And I've got a different problem than Judge Harrington because we're dealing with state probation, and we don't know what the state's going to do to help these offices be able to afford this. Now, again, ultimately, it's the defendant who has to pay the $8 to $10 a day. But that leads to a couple of points, one of which Judge Brewer has already made. They've got a problem in Sessions Court that we don't have because of quantity, volume, the number of these cases. Obviously, there are more cases, misdemeanors, more cases in Sessions Court than we have in circuit, where sometimes our case is a misdemeanor. Sometimes people want a jury trial on a misdemeanor, or they bring a misdemeanor to circuit court and plead guilty at that level. But most of what we see are felonies. So they've got more volume than we've got, although that could change if a defendant were to make the decision, if I'm going to have to pay for this and I can't afford it, I may as well take my chance with the jury, because if I'm not convicted, now that's speculation. But it could send more of their cases to us. But the other way that it's different is that they're dealing with folks who have sentences of 11 months, 29 days. Now, you might have a given defendant who has 2 or 3 of those stacked on top of each other, but essentially they're dealing with 11 months, 29 days. We have people, on the other hand, who are on probation or community corrections for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. And the reality is, these folks, even though our clerk, in my opinion, does as good a job as any clerk in this state, and better than most, of collecting costs, court costs, fines, and restitution, there's just you can't get blood out of a turnip. That's the reality. And these defendants aren't likely going to be able to afford to pay $10 a day for 11 months, 29 days, let alone 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. And then we're faced with the problem, can we violate them? Can we put them in jail if the only real reason we've got to do it is because they're indigent and they can't afford it? And that's another way that we're separately situated, because their appeals come to us. Our appeals go to the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals. And they're going to be looking very carefully at how we exercise this discretion. And one of the things we're told repeatedly that we have to take into account is the ability of the defendant to pay. That's also part of the law, case law, common law, but it's also part of the law that Judge Harrington and I have to follow, the same as we have to do the statutes. So we've got some different issues, but in the end, it's the same problem. And we don't know how it's going to unfold. We're just going to have to try to do the best we can. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't have any doubt that it's a well-intentioned law. And again, as Judge Brewer said, we sympathize with this family. We know it was a terrible thing. The law's well-intentioned, but so often the General Assembly passes laws without thinking about who's going to pay for it and practically how it's going to work. And I think this is one of them. And unfortunately, we're the ones who have to then figure out how it's going to happen. And we're also the ones where if somebody goes out and hurts or kills somebody, commits a new crime, and we have not put one of these things on them for whatever reason, that's going to come back to us. It's not going to come back to anybody other than the judge. Well, that's what we asked for when we asked to have this job. But nevertheless, we're not equipped with crystal balls. And that's something that it's just another complicating factor. You know, we can't always know who's the one who's going to need this device.
And again, we won't have real-time data.
And that's the part that I have the trouble with. This does not immediately read the alcohol. It does not give you a location of where they're at to where you can issue a pickup on them. It's the next day, and it's still not going to tell you where they're at. If it shows up violation, I'm assuming then you have to go look for them. There's no GPS. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
look at the time.
And I need to point out, the devices that Joni has talked about, it's for alcohol only. Doesn't monitor drugs. There's a way to do that for a similar cost. It's basically it's a strip that you put on them, but then you have to take the strip off and send it off to a lab someplace to see if they've been using, drugs.
So
And
these things don't.
as I recall, the most recent vehicular homicides in this county have involved drugs, not alcohol.
And they don't monitor methamphetamines or anything, except you gotta put this Band-Aid on or whatever.
Pretty much.
Or that you can do it.
And
They wear it 14 days, and you take it off of them and send it off to a lab, and it's sometime way down they'll tell you sometime later down the road, yeah, they've been using some drugs.
But they can also do a urine test, is that correct?
Yes.
If they're on probation?
Yes, we do a lot of random urine screens at the office.
Joni, are these things, units that we're gonna have to stock on the shelf, hundreds of them, or do you get them
Well, it would.
one at a time, or what?
It would depend if we contracted with a company. It's gonna be extremely expensive if we bought the units ourselves rather than contracting out. If we contracted out, they would give us a certain amount on the shelf and they would handle all the fee collections and all that. So basically, they would come to our office, we would hook them up, we would supervise them like we would normally supervise them, but the monitoring would go through that company and they would allow us, they would alert us if there was an alcohol event, which means if they had been using alcohol, and then it would be our responsibility as probation officers to contact the judge to violate them for that event.
There's basically two ways to do it. You can buy the machines.
Or you can rent them.
Rent them. My suggestion is going to be that the least trouble we can put them through, the better off it'll be, because you're talking about adding personnel. I'm sure you don't want to do that.
But in the end, it is likely to increase the jail population. I mean, there's just no two ways around it.
Well, if we're looking at 750 new people, and that's just a rough estimate. I mean, I know Joni can't do that with the staff she has now. You're talking about almost, a third of what you're already doing, being added to your, to the.
Believe me, we've talked for days and hours trying to figure out a good solution. There's not one.
Would you recommend that we just bide our time on this for now, or till you all get a handle on it?
I'd like to see how the state's going to handle this.
Well, there's no recommendation I can make to you because her office doesn't serve our courts. Although we are encouraging the folks from state probation and community corrections to communicate with her and to try to work together to try to find out what's going on at the state level, if anything. So we certainly want them to work together. We're not in a position to say, let's just ignore this law. We can't do that. It's now in effect. As of July 1, it's effective as we stand here. But the reality is, it's not possible for us at this point in time to comply with it because we don't have these devices to require people to wear.
And again, it's discretionary.
It is.
I don't, they passed it, and we want to try to comply.
If we can demonstrate that we're making a good faith effort in seeking out a way to enforce this law, to carry it out, it would be in the best interest of the county.
And it doesn't seem like we could be alone. I mean, if we're facing this problem, it would seem like every county across the state is also facing it.
That's true, but what's different about Blount County is here is where the law originated, and there's going to be most likely there will be more scrutiny applied to Blount County because here's where the law came from.
And I've called around several of my colleagues in the counties, and they weren't even aware of it. Of course, it's been on our radar for a little while simply because of the event that took place. And they're not even aware of it, so we made them aware of it. I don't know what they're going to do. I have no idea.
Is there any other questions?
I don't know what to ask about it. I don't know where we go from here.
Well, I think practically we need to continue studying this. We need to, Joni's really working hard on trying to find out what the options are, how much it's gonna cost. We probably need to come back to you or somebody with something that at least says, this is what we think it would cost. And, you know, how many we would need to purchase and what the cost would be. And then, we need to stay in touch, get our offices to communicate with her office on from the state level, and then the judges need to keep talking about realistically, how are we going to apply this? Are we going to apply it every single time that we believe the law, every single time we believe drugs or alcohol is a contributing factor, which is probably 90% of all felonies? Or are we going to, we can require this if we determine that it's a contributing factor, but it's almost always a contributing factor to the crimes we deal with. So we're gonna have to keep talking about, are we gonna just routinely apply it, or are we gonna try to develop some criteria, some guidelines that, you know, we will apply it in this instance, but not in that instance, but with the understanding that we hope the public will understand that, you know, criteria aren't perfect. And the one person we don't put it on is going to be the one who's going to go out and kill somebody. And but we need to keep talking and probably come back to you with some information and costs.
We just want to make y'all aware of the, again, potential financial problem that impact this is going to have on the county. We hope we get the public to know that too. We do, you know, we're trying not to overpopulate the jail. We've got, and you know, we approved the electronic monitoring a few months back, and we're taking baby steps on that. We've got, Joni tells me now we've got 10 on it now, so those are 10 that aren't in the jail now. That's a small number, granted. But again, and they're charging them $10 a day, and we're finding it's difficult to get somebody that can afford that. Frankly.
Are they paying the money now, John?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they are. And actually, I think 3 or 4 of them have significant health problems that are on it too, that they've been in the hospital, and then we've been able to monitor them through that. And so it's worked out. They've been able to get their medical care.
It works great.
It's been a phenomenal program.
But you got to pay for it.
Is there any way the county could be held liable for us not buying these bracelets?
I can't answer that.
I know. I was trying to get a legal opinion out of it.
Again, we just want to bring it to y'all's attention, and we'll wrangle with it, see what we can come up with. But, I don't think much is going to change between now and then, other than be able to give you probably a recommendation on what we're going to do as far as a provider, and then we'll go from there. But eventually, I mean, reality is the closer you supervise these folks, the more likely you're going to find them to be in violation.
That's something we don't like to talk about in a way, but the reality is there are people, yes, the system wants to catch them if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, okay? It's not that we don't want to catch them if they're violating the law, violating the conditions of probation. I'm just saying the reality is there are people every day on probation doing things that don't come back before us, and they don't fill up a jail cell because nobody knows they're doing it. Now, they might eventually get caught, but the more you do to monitor them, the more certain you are to catch them. And then that's going to increase the jail population.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we want to bury our heads in the sand and not know. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the reality is the more you monitor, the more you're going to catch.
Chief French told me this, he was in my courtroom this afternoon, that there's 486 inmates now.
It wouldn't matter if you had an outside contractor to buy them, put them on and collect the fees and everything, because if they didn't pay, they'd end up in Sheriff Brown's jail.
Or if they violated, which 75% of them are going to do, probably, they're going to end up there also.
Like eventually there'd have to be some kind of push back to the state level to at least approve some funding.
It won't surprise me, at least at the circuit, well, it wouldn't surprise me at all levels to see sometime in the next year or 2 or 3, some movement to provide indigency funds for this, but it's not gonna happen overnight, and the law is now effective. And we don't know what the state's gonna do, if anything, in terms of indigency funds.
Any other discussion or questions? Thank you, judges.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joni. Next on discussion with possible action, these grant applications, 2A, drug court. Amy? Is Amy here?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we forward this on to the
Okay.
committee with the recommendation to approve the application.
All right. All right, have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Do a roll call vote.
Kirby? Lewis? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Item 2B, Sheriff's Department on grant application. Do I have a motion? Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any questions? We have Chief French here if you have any questions. I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Kirby? Lewis? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Okay, at this one, next 1, 2, 3, or G3, I'd like to hand off to Mr. Vineyard and let him sort of give a segue into this presentation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. As I have been making you aware of some of the challenges we have with some of our technology or lack thereof, we find ourselves at a crossroads where we're in need of identifying a solution that addresses our mid-1980s technology on our payroll system and also allows us to create an HR system, a human resource system, that provides us an integrated solution which we do not have now. We have processes that we are involved in both of these areas, and we are practically dependent on the individuals who are responsible for those processes. And where we find ourselves now is a number, to be specific, 3 of those key individuals are retiring the 1st of September. And when we identified this problem and the need to address and come up with a solution, we pulled all of the folks that are involved in payroll, which is everybody in county government as far as office holders and department heads are concerned, and we put an RFP out on the street to find out what was available out there that might meet our need. In the meantime, we realized that we had a deficiency on staff of having someone that had the skill set to manage this process and these projects, and we identified someone who was able to do that for us in a very high level. And we're very fortunate to have Bill Ronner, who is here and will walk you through this presentation. Bill's got a unique set of skills that we don't have on our staff, and he is doing it on a volunteer basis. He is retired from FedEx and brings a skill set that I think is very, very valuable to us. We're very fortunate to be able to use his expertise at this time. So, Bill, if you would, come up and kind of walk everyone through this presentation.
Thank you, Randy, Mayor and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. And I'd like to introduce David Herndon from Courthouse. You'll hear more about that entity in a few minutes. He's the account executive for the vendor that we on the project have identified as providing the best solution to this business challenge. And that's really why we're here tonight, is to seize the opportunity to solve a business challenge before it becomes a business problem. And that's what the presentation is tonight about. Just quickly, what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit of background on how we got to this moment in history, the opportunity for improvement, and a specific recommendation on addressing this business challenge before it becomes a business problem. Blount County has got about 2,807 employees, and that includes employees from the schools, sheriff's office, highway, library, government That's salaried exempt, hourly, full-time, part-time, seasonal, special event, elected, appointed, and hired. You've got paychecks being issued electronically twice a month for some people, once a month for some people, every 2 weeks for some people, and then some employees are paid only when they work. You've got a total county annual payroll of $79.5 million, and the good news is 99% of your employees are paid through direct deposit. Very few manual checks are cut. That's the good news. Okay, an employee for the county their pay is determined by several factors. The next screen is going to be what actually triggers their pay. Their pay is determined by their annual salary or their hourly rate, holiday pay, sick pay, hours and days worked, hours and days not worked, overtime worked, scheduled days off, exceptions to their work schedule, and any other supplemental payments. So that's what drives their pay. Here's what drives their paycheck, what triggers their paycheck. The employee records their time, or their supervisor records their time manually on a piece of paper or other document. It's reviewed and approved by the supervisor or their manager. It's then entered into official time records. It's calculated. It's submitted to payroll, to central payroll, electronically using Excel spreadsheets or by other data entry forms. Ginger Whitehead and Faye, in central payroll, they aggregate, consolidate this information. They review it, they audit it, they balance it, and they approve it. And then finally, it's released so that so the county employees can get paid. And it's the one part of this that's automated is the posting to the general ledger. But everything I've told you about so far is manual, as you'll see on the next screen. Every bit of what I just told you about, the time recording, the review, the approval, the entry, the aggregation, the auditing and balancing, the release of payroll, and the ACH transaction to the originating bank. All of that's manual. The only part of this process that's automated is the posting of that data, that final data, to the county's general ledger system. Continuation of the payroll processing. These processes are pretty much the way they were 20 years ago, except for the use of Excel spreadsheets and email, which we didn't have back then. Direct deposit for 99% of the employees is a bright spot in this picture, and of course the automation of vendor checks. Good news is the payroll timeliness for county employees has been at 100%, and we believe the accuracy of payroll has been at 100% for about 98% of the employees. The footnote to that is there are some inaccuracies that are probably going on that we don't know about because nobody ever catches them, and that's not to point a finger at anybody. It just happens because this is an entirely manual process of recording, reviewing, approving, entering, calculating an employee's time that drives their pay. So inaccuracies do result from manual processes and manual calculations earlier in the process, and that's because you've got hundreds of pay and work rules that affect an employee's pay. Okay, the cost of payroll processing. We did a study as part of this project team to identify how much time county employees invest in processing payroll. And again, that's not just the payroll part of it, that's the timekeeping part. The study revealed that 932 hours per pay period are invested in recording, reviewing, approving, submitting, aggregating, auditing, balancing, and releasing payroll to get employees paid. That's 1,864 hours a month on average, and it's the equivalent of almost 11 full-time employees doing these processes. Now, of course, you don't have 11 full-time employees doing these processes. You've got steps in this process sprinkled across 104 players in the county government who are doing these functions, but it's the equivalent. You're burning up enough manual time, labor time, for the equivalent of 11 full-time employees doing this, not to mention the 240 reams of paper on the trees. This process that the county is using, that's been in place for so long, is dependent upon 104 critical players in the county. 68 of them in the school system, doing the functions I've already told you about, 3 in the sheriff's office, 31 in other parts of county government, and 2 employees doing the centralized aspect of it. That's Ginger and Faye. Those are 2 of the people who will retire very shortly. So you've got an incredibly large process at work, a lot of different players, and it's all manual. It hinges on several key players, 3 of whom are getting ready to retire. Again, it's not a business problem yet. We're trying to keep it from becoming a business problem. Characteristics of payroll processes, you've got a bunch of different working payrolls and policies among the different departments. What they're doing and how they're doing it is logical in the sense that it's not illogical, but it's very fragmented, it's very manual. It's expensive to execute, it's expensive and time-consuming to audit your payroll performance against legal requirements. Very difficult and expensive to conduct what-if analysis. And one of you asked, what would it cost the county to give a 2.3% pay raise to this group, a 2.23% pay raise to that group, and a 1.4% pay raise to this group over here? With all due respect to Randy and his team, it might take a month or two to get that information. There's a better way to do it, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute. Most importantly, the current processes and the systems are vulnerable to the death, retirement, illness, or departure of key players in the process, and we are facing it. You've got 3 people leaving and a 4th who has made noises about leaving in the next year or so. And as importantly, Randy may want to speak to this, we are vulnerable to FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, audits, violations, fines, and penalties over the hours worked, overtime compliance, classification system, record-keeping requirements, and policy maintenance. Finally, and last but not least, you've got really very little management and supervisor visibility into overtime on a work group, departmental, divisional basis, because you don't have this reporting system to capture and report that and make it visible to the people who have the best opportunity of managing and controlling that for best results. Randy, did you want to talk about the FLSA or not? Okay. All right. So we talked about payroll. Let's talk about human resources for a second. The human resource processes from a moment an applicant hits a radar screen to be hired for a particular job all the way through to the moment they retire or even die. Every part of those processes, every aspect of them is manual, from the employee, the applicant tracking, through the new hire orientation and onboarding process, through the payroll process, through the retirement process, and finally any death benefits they may have. So every bit of this is manual, it's paper-based, and Lord help us if a piece of paper gets lost, like a beneficiary designation on a life insurance form, or some election on a group health policy or dental policy. Some piece of paper gets lost, somebody doesn't get what they're supposed to get, first starts flying. So from a manual processing standpoint on the HR side, you've got I-9 forms, direct deposit, W-4, Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. All these benefits and all these processes are still manual. There's a better way. Continuing, yes, sure. Sorry, I get carried away. Continuing with this, the administration of disability benefits, retirement benefits, term life and whole life benefits, COBRA processing, the billing that we do for voluntary and medical benefits, every discrepancy between data that we have and data that the vendor has on an employee or a claim or a process or an enrollment, every discrepancy we have takes an average of 45 minutes to find and correct. That's very time consuming. From a benefit standpoint, you've got one employee in the risk management and HR group who handles these tasks and functions. That group's budget's been cut by 24% in the last 5 years, and their staff has been reduced by 70% in the last 5 years. You talk about a critical player in the process, you're at risk. Something ever happened to the person handling all this stuff because she's it. Human resource processes are 95% manual. And finally, if that's not good enough for you, open enrollment for benefits has got to be outsourced this year unless we find a system that can automate it. And the system we're going to tell you about does automate open enrollment. The cost of outsourcing it this year would be $117,600 based on a quote we've received. And so if we can move forward with an automated system to solve these other business challenges, we can avoid the cost of outsourcing open enrollment. So that's $117,000 a year you will save from this point forward. If the county's payroll practices were to be audited, the scores you see on the screen are the scores we as a project team, that includes payroll and HR, believe we would get. And I'm not going to read them off to you. I'll just let you read them for you. Can everybody see the screens down here? There's some good news up there, and there's some not so great news up there. Vulnerability to FLSA fines and penalties is a big ticket item. Vulnerability to death or illness of a critical player, and certainly the cost and the efficiency of the current process and the vulnerability to a major catastrophe. That's where we think we'd be if we were audited by an outside firm on our payroll practices. Okay, so we're operating essentially as we did in 1990, except for the use of direct deposit, Excel, spreadsheets, and email, and automated vendor payments. You've got, and we've already mentioned this, so I hate to be repetitive, but you've got 3 critical players retiring by the end of this year, another one planning to retire in the next couple of years. We estimate, the project team estimates, that there is a very significant probability of some sort of a major disruption in the next 12 months to the timely and accurate payroll execution. We don't know what, when, why, how, or where it may happen, but we think our luck is running out and something is going to happen. Recognizing the opportunity and the potential business problem, the county identified the need to automate payroll, timekeeping, and human resource functions. Formed a preliminary project team that included all the right players: payroll, purchasing, accounting, human resources, and IT. Developed an RFP, advertised it publicly, and sent it to several vendors known to be in the business of solving municipal and governmental entity HR and payroll system challenges. In the winter, we received proposals from 10 vendors. 1 vendor was kicked out for not meeting the public sector experience requirement. The 9 remaining proposals were evaluated, scored, ranked by the team, and the top 4 scoring vendors were asked to come and make presentations to Blount County, which they did in the spring. We had presentations at the 911 Center by Infinisource, Ultimate Software, Kronos, and Cherry Road. Those presentations lasted about 2 hours each. And every stakeholder in county government who would be affected by a change in payroll processes and payroll systems was invited to attend these presentations. Most groups attended all or most of the presentations. So the vendor capabilities and system functionalities were evaluated and scored, and the vendor that I've already mentioned, David Herndon's company, Kronos, emerged as a vendor whose system best offered a solution to meet our particular needs. It's functional, it's user-friendly. They have the best understanding of unique governmental needs. Based on the RFP, their software and their services are competitively priced. We've done our due diligence on them. We're very satisfied that they are the vendor we'd like to move forward with on contract negotiations, and you'll hear about that in a second. So in May, Kronos sent a couple of representatives to Maryville to meet with us and give us a live demo of their system in action. It wasn't just the dog and pony show that every vendor did. Not that they were bad, but that's not what that was about. They actually got us into the system and allowed us to play around and navigate from one part of the system to the other to understand how it works, what data is captured, what the functions do. And then they granted us what we call playground access for 5 days. And they allowed 10 of us to actually have user IDs and passwords to get into their system for 2 days before we went to Salem, Virginia, and 2 days after we went to Salem, Virginia, so we could play with it on our own. The purpose of that was to make sure we understood at a basic level what the system could do and help us identify questions to ask the folks at Salem, Virginia. So the next thing we did 2 days later, on May 19th, was to drive to Salem, Virginia at 6 o'clock in the morning to meet with their folks for 4 hours. They had recently implemented this system. They're still in the process of implementing it. But we met for 4 hours with 4 people, and we talked about their experience with Kronos. And I'm here to tell you that 4 times during that meeting, we were told there is nothing that we will ask this system to do that it cannot do, which was good news. You'd rarely hear that about software applications. We were told how pleased they were with Kronos and their support and their assistance in implementing the system. They told us about the mistakes they made from a philosophical and a practical standpoint, the mistakes they made on the front end of their project and how we could avoid making those same mistakes, and that was extremely, if nothing else, that was worth the trip up there to listen to. And they offered to help us if we chose Kronos and wanted to move forward. They offered to help us. One of their employees had worked for Goodwill, which had implemented Kronos, and she was beside herself with joy over the prospect of us implementing Kronos. She just thought so highly of the system. She couldn't say enough good about it. And to have somebody who's lived and breathed, through an implementation project, in her case actually kind of twice, to have them have glowing things to say about a vendor, because I've been there on these implementation projects at FedEx, and I can tell you it's not always pretty. So it was refreshing to hear somebody have some good things to say about a software application vendor. All right, so the team evaluated all of the 4 solutions and presentations. Kronos came out as the #1 rated solution. Their pricing's competitive, the system is logical and intuitive, very robust. We're confident that it will do anything we need for it to do. I've told you about Salem, Virginia, folks. Kronos offers the solution and the system of choice for us to solve this business challenge. They've been in business 35 years. This is what they do for a living. They specialize in public sector human resources and payroll solutions. You can see on your screen some of the public entities, not all of them, that have implemented their solution. They're a privately held entity held by private equity firms of quite a bit of well-renowned reputation. We're satisfied they were financially responsible and properly qualified to offer the solution and to help us implement it. From an HR standpoint and a time and attendance standpoint, the solution automates all of the manual tasks and processes that I told you about. There is a lot of front-end work required to get the system in. This isn't slide a floppy disk into your tower unit on your desk and say, okay, everybody start capturing your time in a unit. There's a lot of front-end work, a lot of data that has to be loaded, and a lot of business rules and work and pay rules that have to be documented and loaded into the system to make it work. Once you're there, it's very, very automated. Most importantly, it eliminates all the risks that I told you about earlier in the presentation. Automates payroll process that applies the work rules and the pay rules to recorded time and attendance, calculates pay, deductions, taxes, and garnishments, handles multiple payrolls, payroll exceptions, tax IDs. It does the unique 28-day cycle for law enforcement, automatically does the ACH transfer to banks, does your exception reporting, your 941s, your W-2, your tax filings, unemployment calculations, ad hoc reporting. 2 features of this system that most people don't think about, and fortunately they don't have to worry about these types of thoughts, but it has what we call as-of reporting capability, as well as complete audit trail. It tracks everything that happens in the system, and it records when it was done, and it records who did it based on their login credentials. So it knows who made every change in the system, and it blocks changes by people who are not authorized to make a change like that. As importantly, the as-of reporting capability, you can ask this system, tell me what everything looked like on August the 17th of 2012 or October 19th of 2010, and provided the data has been loaded, it goes back and it says, here's the way everything looked. That's extremely robust capability. Not only that, it's also got the what-if capability. You ask for what is it going to cost us to do a 2.3% pay raise to this group, a 5.4% pay raise to that group, et cetera, and it can do it in a matter of moments rather than the month that it may take all that manual work to get to those numbers. Again, once you've loaded the data in, it handles everything from applicant tracking all the way through onboarding a new employee, capturing all of their data, making sure that the open enrollment parts are done, that they're enrolled in all of the benefit programs they're supposed to be, presents the elections. It's got an employee self-service portal where they can log in and see what their benefit programs are. They can make their changes to the extent they're permitted to. They can change their address, their beneficiary designation, their phone number, add a spouse, drop a spouse, add a dependent child. They can do all that themselves from a computer. It's got document upload storage, so you can upload performance reviews and keep them on there. You can upload certificates and licenses. It tracks those, so you'll know when Sally Jo's CPA certificate's about to expire and she's got to go for some more continuing ed credits. automates and tracks OSHA classification and reporting, applicant tracking, EEO tracking. It does everything we need it to do. It will automate the vast majority of the processes we have now. I've got 2 pages, and I'm not going to read this, I'm going to let you read it, but I've got 2 pages of Kronos customer results. These are actual results that Kronos customers have realized after implementing their system. These are savings. By the way, in case it sounds like I'm a salesperson for Kronos, I want to assure you I'm not. I'm not employed by them. I'm not receiving anything from them. I work for the sheriff at his pleasure. I'm a volunteer employee. The only skin I have in this game is to make sure that Blount County succeeds and for me to contribute to its success in any way I possibly can. I happen to believe in the integrity and the value of this project. This project will pay for itself. We'll get to that slide shortly. There are a couple of solution options that I wanted to talk to you about. One is what's called a hosted cloud-based model. And in that model, Kronos hosts the system. They own the software, they own the hardware, they provide the system security, they provide all of the system redundancy and failover capabilities so that if one server goes down, another one kicks in immediately without missing a heartbeat to ensure that it's got 100% uptime on the system. We buy the licenses, and on the front end, as you'll see here in a slide, we pay for their consulting and implementation services to get this thing up and running. We buy the license and we pay an annual licensing fee thereafter. The other model is we buy the licenses and we run it on our servers, which means we're going to be coming back to you every 2 or 3 years to buy another server. In that model, we are responsible for system security against viruses and other malware. We're responsible for redundancy and failover capability. We can't touch Kronos in terms of the capabilities they have unless we want to have a separate server in 3 different locations around the United States, including one in a salt mine somewhere that's impenetrable to nuclear radiation. So we're recommending the hosted cloud-based model so that we don't have to come back to you time and again for more money, more capital money to buy servers and other equipment. We'll present the business case here in a second. All right, so you know where we are, you know what the risks are, you know that there's a solution out there. This is an opportunity to solve a business challenge before it becomes a business problem. We are recommending that the county move forward with this. Again, I'll present the business case in a second. We're recommending that Kronos be the vendor that we're authorized to negotiate with, hopefully toward a contract. And we're recommending the hosted cloud-based model due to the stability and the security of the vendor and their system. Okay, hopefully you can see these numbers. I want to skip down to the next to the last line for a second. That's where the cost is, and you can see, excuse me, there we go. Hey, okay, well, let's just scroll through this. Hey, David, are you back there? David. I'm here. John. Okay, here we go. All right, the next to the last line shows the cost of in year 1 of this project at $1.36 million. That includes, that's a large number, that includes all of the software licenses that we need. That includes all of the hardware that we need to capture employee time. That includes all of the consulting and implementation services that Kronos offers us to help us do the implementation. And that includes a 25% contingency to make sure that if we run into any unusual bumps in the road that we've got that cost covered. And learning from Salem, they did have some contingencies, so we're built in this. So it's front-loaded at $1.36 million the first year, and then an annual licensing fee and support fee of $214,000, $222,000, et cetera. So you can see that the 5-year cost of this is $2.268 million. The bottom line shows you the net savings over that cost, and I'm going to show you how I got there in just a second, of $3.46 million. That's net over the cost of doing the system. So the total potential savings of $5.7 million minus the total cost over a 5-year period is, the net savings of that is $3.4 million. So the system can pay for itself with the savings that you realize through efficiency, elimination or reduction in waste and mistakes. So there are 5 ways you get there. Number 1 is probably the last line, and that's avoiding the $117,000 a year of open enrollment outsourcing expense, because we cannot do it ourselves. If you start at the top, Courthouse, and David Herndon's here to speak to this if you have any questions, but Courthouse, through third-party analysis, after implementation by some of their customers, has concluded that based on our hourly annual payroll of $16.8 million, we could save 1.2% of that by eliminating the manual calculation mistakes and input mistakes. That would save us almost $202,000 a year. The next couple of lines, pay, inflation, and gaming, we could save 1.25% of that $16.8 million hourly payroll, and we could save 0.5% on the accrued leave inflation. This is employees mistakenly or otherwise overstating the hours they've worked, understating the amount of time they've taken off, or overstating the amount of time, paid time off that they're entitled to take. Once you get their vacation, their sick leave, all this stuff loaded into the system will know whether they're supposed to get paid. And if they're not supposed to get paid, they won't get paid. That's where some of these savings come in. And then from an administrative standpoint, this is the efficiency part of this business solution. Remember when I told you we had almost 11 full-time equivalent employees doing manual payroll processes and timekeeping processes. The cost of that, based on the reduction that Courthouse estimates we could realize based on their other customer experiences, they estimated that we could save $611,000 a year by automating manual processes. And Randy can talk to how we get there a little bit in a minute, but it's basically an efficiency exercise. We weren't completely comfortable with that number. It's not that we don't believe it, we're just not confident that we can get there. So we dialed it back by 50% for the first year after, and remember, and take note that the savings don't start till year 2, because we think it would take us about 9 months to implement the system. So we think we could realize 50% of what Courthouse estimates we could save for a savings that first year, which would be year 2, of $305,000. Thereafter, we believe we could realize 80% of the savings that Courthouse estimated for on a savings every year of $488,000. Those are fairly conservative estimates. So the savings potential, the 100% total savings potential, you can see that line give you $7.16 million total savings potential over this 5-year savings time period. If you still don't believe that, or you're not comfortable with it and you say that just sounds too good to be true, let's dial it back just to be safe. So if you take 80% of that 100% number and look at the numbers, that's the next line down, you get to $5.7 million. And that's the number I use to give you your net savings on this project over a 5-year period. You take the $2.268 million cost over that 5 years, the $5.7 million savings over the 5-year savings period, and you get a net savings of $3.46 million. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the business case for solving the business challenge before it becomes a business problem.
There's to some of the points that Bill's talked about on the savings opportunities, we've got exposure. Part of what this does more than anything else is make everybody accountable for their own responsibilities and actions. Makes employees accountable because they're going to have to accurately document when they're at work and when they're not at work. Makes the employer accountable in that they want to make sure that they don't have those work rules violated. So just pick an illustration. Let's say I come in at 6:30 in the morning and I clock in when I come in, and my shift doesn't start till 7 o'clock in the morning. And I just sit down and socialize for that 30 minutes before I go on the clock. Well, technically, I was on the clock when I clocked in. So that's an exposure for us. And I have reason to believe we've got all those types of instances that go on, and you have to assume that given the manual nature of everything involved in this process. And the only way you're going to improve that is to tighten it up. So if we had this type of system in place now, if I went in to clock in at 6:30 like I'd been in the habit of doing, I couldn't clock in because my schedule's already been predetermined and loaded. So I wouldn't be allowed to clock in until my shift started at 7 o'clock. It allows us to consistently treat the same classes of people by classification in a consistent manner that I don't know that we have the ability to do now. I just guarantee you we don't. And I can't begin to express the frustration that all the players involved in this process experience every pay period, because nothing is simple and nothing is easy. And then the last benefit that Bill touched on that I think is a no-brainer. It puts a lot of information and a very valuable management tool in the hands of our office holders and department heads that they do not have now. And this is because of the age of what we have, you basically have to go through like a clearinghouse to get any information. And it ought not be that difficult. So, we briefed the mayor on this. The mayor said, let's proceed. He convened the office holders meeting. We gave them the presentation. I think they see the benefits to their respective organizations, and we've got the support of that body of people as well. And
I'd just like to add a couple of things. All of the data that I told you about that would be input, stored, and calculated by this system, that is our data. It will always be our data. We own it. We will always have access to it. We will have backups to it. If we ever get crossed up with Kronos, we can take our data and go home and play with somebody else in a different sandbox. Hopefully that wouldn't happen, but it's always our data. And it will always be far more accessible than it is now. There's, as Randy pointed out, accessible to the people who need it. This thing has on-demand reporting capabilities. It's got a whole suite of canned programs that you can run, and if you don't like any of those or you want to do something really interesting with it, you can export whatever you need into Excel and then do your own calculations in Excel. And if you don't like that, you can take data from Excel and dump it into the system, and then manage it, analyze it any way you want. That's the business case. Anybody have any questions?
Randy, the schools are on board.
absolutely. Matter of fact, Troy and his payroll team have been an integral part of Bill's project team, as have been members of my staff, Don's staff. We've had everybody at the table. I think, if I remember correctly, we averaged over 23 people at each of the interviews that we did back in March out at the 911 center. By the way, that facility is a great facility for something like this when you've got so many users that are trying to see the same information. Matter of fact, all the presenters were kind of blown away at that resource that we have, and it made their job easier to present the information to us, and it certainly made for a better environment for us to absorb it. So I think Blount County is to be commended for that asset. Steve?
I'm impressed with your presentation, and I'm impressed with the numbers you say that we can realize in savings, but who's going to monitor this system to make sure we see those savings and reach those goals?
I'm going to ask David to talk to the tools that the system has available to analyze and capture that type of information. And I'll ask Randy to address what management steps have to be taken to actually realize those savings and make them visible to you.
Good evening. Generally what you'll want to do is, after the system's operational for a period of time, generally 6 months or so. An easy thing to do is just start going back and look at obvious numbers. What's happened to overtime? What's happened to your regular wages? What's happened to your leave liabilities? So all that information should be readily available today in your current payroll system, so you can easily compare those.
But are you going to do that, or are we going to have to rely on our county staff to do that?
We can assist with that. Obviously, your staff has the data, today's data, so they have much probably clearer and easy access than we would, but we can assist the staff in doing that.
You okay with that?
What we would want to do is make sure that, just for comparison purposes, I mean, if this is something that the commission approves and we enjoy the success that their other clients, I would want to make sure that we capture the same data with the same methodology that their other clients have done. Because I'm assuming they would want to use us as a reference as well at some point.
Yes, we would.
Would we not be better off to have a third party, though, look at it?
Well, you could. I mean, that's certainly your option if you'd like.
And most of actually all the savings data that you see there, with the exception of open enrollment, which is your own internal number, and the actual hours that counties and school staff are spending on the payroll process today, those calculations and projections are third-party validated data, and we can provide you copies of those studies if you like. Some of them are lengthy, some of them are quite short, but data is pretty consistent that analysts provide in the savings associated with the reduction of payroll errors, with a reduction in leave liability. It's pretty consistent across the board.
Randy, an action we've taken over the last month in changing what was designated and undesignated, that's where we get the $987,507, correct?
Yes, the cost, as Bill pointed out, we've set a budget for the upfront cost of $1,361,000. I put a budget amendment in your packet because I didn't know how you might want to proceed. We already have a little less than $1 million right now that is set aside for capital projects. If you deem this to be a capital project, which initially I did, because when we submitted the capital plan to you, as sketchy as it may be, back in April, we had this project listed, but we had it noted that we didn't know the estimate of the cost because we were in the process of doing our due diligence, as Bill has pointed out. We now know the facts of what it's going to cost investment-wise. So we would propose that you use up to $1,361,000 in fund balance. $987,000 of that is already identified and earmarked for capital, and then you'd be coming out of fund balance for the rest of that undesignated. It's you know, you might say, well, there may be 3 or 4 other items that are of higher priority that are capital in their origin. And I would suggest to you, I don't know of anything that is any more important than making sure that we meet our payroll obligations in the most accurate way possible. We have a $79.5 million exposure. And this is an opportunity where we can make an investment and get a return on it. And in this day and age, you can't get returns on interest income, but I think we can make every effort to make an investment where we can reduce our expenditures going forward.
Is all this money required upfront at the beginning of the project?
Yeah.
The 1.36 million would be spent in the first year. Some of it's very much upfront, and that's the software licenses, the purchase of the time capture devices, and then the consulting and implementation services will be on a pay-as-you-go or bill-as-you-go basis as we burn those services up. That would be over more of a 9-month period.
And what's the time frame?
We're hoping to implement the entire system and get it up and running in 9 months. That's pretty aggressive for a system of this complexity and an operation of this complexity, but that's our goal, 9 months.
It seems to me like, though, if we spend all our capital at one time, as you correctly pointed out, what happens if we have another need? Are we going to wind up having to dump more money into capital?
Well,
I mean, what if something happens to this roof? We've been talking about fixing this roof.
well, this roof we've already got programmed.
You already what?
We already have this roof programmed.
Okay.
But that's a legitimate point. But if we have that emergency come up, we'll have to deal with it at that time. And we still have some reserves left to address those types of issues as they may come up. I'm going to have other capital needs that I'm going to make the commission aware of, but we're waiting to get estimates back in on what those are. So I want to give you some realistic numbers and not something that just made up on the back of a napkin.
Well, as I pointed out in the commission meeting, it would be nice if we had a list where we could look at it and say, okay, here's the HR software, that's 1.3 million. Here's a roof. Here's a new platform for the IT department that's needed. I mean, we still don't have that.
Well, you got a list back in April, and that list totaled $1,263,733, of which $1,145,773 was approved in the budget that commission has adopted.
And that's in addition to this 1.3 million.
That is correct. This 1.3 was not included. The project was listed, but we had it identified as TBD, to be determined, because we didn't know the cost of it at the time back in April.
So what you're telling me is that we have over or nearly 2.5 million then identified.
No, I'm telling you, you got a lot more than that. I just can't tell you how much a lot more is, because we haven't gotten the estimates back in yet from our experts who are pricing things for us. I can't give you an estimate on this building on the structural issues that we have with it until we get those cost estimates back.
There was a capital list in our agenda packets, and was it April 4th?
April 7th.
April 7th, that we got. It was presented to the Finance Committee, or to the Budget Committee.
I must have missed that.
Mr. Chairman, though, with timing, obviously, the priority had been set because you formed a task force 6 months ago, 8 months ago, to address this issue. And the more the task force worked on it, the more the priority, the more the urgency became apparent, is what I think I saw from the presentation. Uncovered a number of items that I guess you could say ignorance is bliss. And now that they've been brought into the front of our brains, we're at a place also that we've got 3 people who are retiring. We're at a crossroads to make a decision.
Randy, I mean, everything that I've seen about this system is good. And, I don't think there's a question about the need for the system. On the funding side, we have $987,000 in capital monies there to be spent. The $373,000, which were shy of implementing the 1.3 million, maybe it's presumptuous to say all that should come from the county's fund balance. My question would be, we talk to the schools, because they're obviously a huge amount of the payroll and the people that come through, to share some of the cost of the additional monies that aren't allocated to capital. And why would we not consider that? And why would the schools not consider that?
Well, my simple brain looks at it this way. It's the county's the employer. The county processes all the payroll right now. It's the county system. We didn't subdivide it by department or office holder. And you don't have to get into split dollar issues either. So from my simple way of looking at it, I thought this was an employer obligation, the employer being Blount County.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, you have anything?
Oh, no.
Is there any other discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we send it forward this month to the agenda committee.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? To move it, to send it on to the agenda committee. With or without?
I make a motion to send it forward with a recommendation.
Yes.
With a recommendation.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Let me just say one other thing. As long as I'm here, I think you have an expectation and should have an expectation that we bring matters to you like this that are well vetted, that have involved every player that has a role in the process, and that we've been as thorough as we can possibly be. And I want to thank Bill for his leadership, and I certainly want to thank all the project team members as well, because they have invested a ton of time into this. And unlike some of our peer counties who've gone out and spent a lot of money for consultants, we didn't spend any money on consultants. We spent some gas money and we spent some food money to go to Salem, Virginia. So I want to thank them for that. But you should have the expectation to have a quality review of any process improvement that we're trying to do in Blount County. Thank you.
You know, this has been an ongoing process that we talked about 3 years ago, is upgrading the technology and trying to get ourselves into at least into this century, because we have been so antiquated, and that's what you're seeing in the departments like Roy's and Tom's and Phyllis and Scott, and you know, we're trying to chip away at this and trying to get us brought into to this century in technology, because we are way behind, and it's costing us. It's costing us every day. And this is this right here is just one of those that that Bill and his team were able to put together and show the payback that it offers. I'm there every day. I watch how those people work, and they work themselves to death having to handle these things and do everything by hand. It's so antiquated. You know, it's hard to believe that as a county government we're still doing it this way.
On the human resources side, on the workman comp claims and all this stuff that we have filed against the county, is this going to help on that side?
This system does
To
not.
make sure everybody's where they should be at the right times and what job they're supposed to be doing and all this stuff.
This system will help managers make sure that employees do the job they're supposed to be doing and get paid for the job they're doing, and not get paid for the work they're not doing, not get paid for inflated time off or work that they said they didn't do. From a workers' compensation standpoint, David, correct me, this system does not automate workers' compensation processes. Those are typically handled by a third-party administrator who have their own systems that are designed for workers' compensation. Is that fair, David?
I can add one thing to that. Since you do have online historical, you will have online historical data of events or injuries or illnesses on the job, it'll be much easier for department heads or HR or other county officials to see a problem if it's happening. If there are too many injuries in a certain area, or if there, illnesses are occurring at a much higher rate in one part of a department than the other, you'll have visibility to that with Chronos that you probably don't have visibility to today. So in that way, you could help reduce workers' comp claims and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
And all elected officials have signed off.
Phyllis was at the meeting. I let her speak for herself. I can't speak for anybody else, but they all said move forward.
Yes, that was consensus. Was it unanimous?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, I have a motion and a second to move this forward with a recommendation. Have any other more discussion? I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Kirby? Lewis? Mitchell?
Yes.
Moon?
Yes.
Samples? The motion's passed.
Bill, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for your team's work. I know y'all have worked very hard on this. Appreciate it.
We will load this presentation on the website in the morning so that it'll be available for review, and we'll have it available tomorrow night for the same presentation to the Agenda Committee.
At this time, I'll ask if there's any comments on items not on the agenda. Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to
Move to adjourn.
adjourn. Thank you.
Rob Carter approve this message?